Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we cut through the noise and get straight to the knowledge that matters. Today, we are tackling, well, I think one of the biggest sources of just misery and self-doubt for anyone trying to learn something new, specifically language learning guilt.
Oh, absolutely. That feeling is just, it's everywhere, isn't it? You spend months, maybe years working on a language. You think you finally got it, maybe the subjunctive or those tricky noun cases.
Right, you feel like you're making real progress.
Exactly. And then you skip studying for, I don't know, a week, maybe two. You try to speak or even just understand something and poof, feels like it's all gone.
It's like sand slipping through your fingers. The right words just won't come. That hard-won knowledge feels completely evaporated.
Mm-hmm.
And that feeling, that inconsistency, or hitting that dreaded plateau, it leads straight to guilt. We start thinking, it must be me.
Yeah, we internalize this idea that, real language mastery has to mean years of just brain-numbing drills, conjugations, declensions, irregular verbs.
All that stuff. And if you're not perfectly memorizing every single exception, well, you feel like you're failing personally, like you're just not cut out for it.
And that's where our sources today come in. They offer this huge, scientifically backed reality check. What we're going to show is that inconsistency, forgetting things, those frustrating ups and downs in your performance, they're not personal failures at all.
Okay, so what are they then?
They are actually completely normal, predictable features of how the adult human brain learns something as complex as a language. It's just part of the process.
So our mission today is pretty clear then. We're using some serious linguistic research to hopefully free you, the listener, from the tyranny of rote memorization and that constant battle against grammar rules.
Exactly. We want to help you move towards understanding and actually using the brain's own natural internal language machine.
Okay, so where are we getting this information? What's the basis for this reality check?
We've pulled together insights from two really critical areas. First, there's massive scale research on what's called second language acquisition, or SLA. This includes some breakthrough studies, some involving hundreds of thousands of people, that finally give us a clearer picture of the adult learning curve.
Wow, hundreds of thousands. That's some serious data.
It really is. And second, we're blending that hard data with the practical, hands-on methods used by incredibly successful polyglots. People like the legendary Hungarian interpreter Kato Long.
Right, people who actually did it, often starting later in life.
Precisely. Because what we all really need is a practical way forward, one that doesn't demand perfection, right? As one of our sources puts it so well, languages aren't inherently hard.
That feels controversial. Some definitely feel harder than others.
Well, think about it this way. Any person, pretty much regardless of aptitude, learns to speak the language of their parents, right? The real challenge for adults isn't some innate lack of ability. It's finding a strategy, a non-guilt-inducing strategy that actually fits into a busy adult life, not some idealized, impossible quest for perfect grammar from day one.
So if you feel like you keep starting over, or your progress stalls, it's probably not you. It's more likely your method is fighting against how your brain naturally wants to learn.
That's the core idea. To stop fighting and start, while thriving, we need to understand the basic mechanics of how your brain actually processes language.
Okay, let's unpack this key distinction then, because I think this explains that frustration we were just talking about. Why is it that you can spend, I don't know, hours drilling grammar rules?
Yeah.
Conscious, focused effort, maybe in a classroom.
Right. Staring at charts, doing exercises.
Yeah. Only to find you completely forget them when you actually need them. Like in a real conversation, maybe months later, it's just gone. But then, somehow, maybe even years down the line, the correct way to say something just sort of pops out automatically without thinking about the rule.
That exact phenomenon, that disconnect, is precisely what led Stephen Krashen, who's really one of the most influential researchers in this whole field of second language acquisition.
Krashen, yeah, heard the name.
It led him to propose his fundamental distinction. He said there's a difference between language acquisition and language learning. There are actually two separate, independent ways our brains develop competence in a language.
Okay, acquisition versus learning. Let's define those clearly. Which one is the main engine for fluency?
The engine is acquisition. Acquisition is a subconscious process. It happens below the level of awareness. It's basically identical to how a child picks up their first language.
Okay, subconscious, like soaking it up.
Exactly. It happens naturally when our focus is on understanding the meaning of what we're hearing or reading, not on the form. And the result of acquisition is this deep intuitive feel for what's correct.
So that's the "it just sounds right" feeling.
Precisely. You don't consciously know the rule, maybe you couldn't even explain it, but a grammatical sentence just sounds right or feels right, and an error feels, well, wrong, jarring somehow. When you're acquiring, you're only really aware that you're communicating, getting the message.
Okay, so that's acquisition. What about the other side? The one that gives us, the grammar tests and textbooks.
That's learning. Learning is the conscious, intentional effort. It's what usually happens through formal instruction. The grammar chart on the wall, the conjugation table, the fill-in-the-blank exercise in the textbook. Learning results in conscious knowledge about the rules. Krashen calls this conscious knowledge the monitor.
The monitor. Okay, so if learning gives us the rules and we have this monitor, why doesn't it make us fluent? Why does the monitor seem to fail us right when we need it most, like in a fast conversation?
Because the monitor has serious limitations. It can only really be used to check and polish our output, like our speech or writing, and only under very specific conditions.
What conditions?
Well, first, you need enough time to actually think about the rule and apply it. Second, your focus has to be on the grammatical form itself, not just the meaning. And third, crucially, you have to actually know the specific rule you're trying to apply.
Ah. And in a real conversation, you have none of those things, usually.
Almost never. When you're in a dynamic, fast-paced chat, you just don't have the seconds needed to consciously dredge up the rule for, say, the perfect subjunctive conjugation, apply it, and keep the conversation flowing.
If you try, you just stumble, pause awkwardly.
Exactly. The conversation collapses, you sound stilted, and this is where the guilt comes in. But understanding this should actually remove the guilt, because the monitor is simply a terrible tool for real-time speech production.
That makes sense. It's more like an editor for writing.
Precisely. And here's the kicker, something that really validates that feeling of frustration. Even professional linguists, people who dedicate their entire lives to describing these complex rules, they readily admit that their conscious knowledge they're learning is often imperfect. It frequently lags years behind what they themselves or other proficient speakers have already acquired intuitively and subconsciously.
Wow. So even the experts can't always consciously explain the rules they use perfectly.
That's right. The monitor is useful as an editor, especially for slow, careful work like writing, but it is absolutely not the primary source of fluency or natural-sounding speech that comes from acquisition.
Okay, so acquisition is the engine, what fuels it. This seems really important. You mentioned comprehensible input.
Comprehensible input, yes, or CI. This is Krashen's hypothesis number 4, and it's basically the non-negotiable requirement for acquisition to happen. CI is defined as language input listening or reading that is just slightly beyond your current level of understanding.
Slightly beyond.
Okay. We often denote this as I+1, where I is your current level and +1 is that little bit extra that pushes you forward.
So the I+1 idea is like the sweet spot, right? The input is, say, I+10. It's just noise. It's overwhelming. You tune out, get anxious.
Exactly. Your filter goes up. And if the input is I+U stuff, you already completely understand, well, it's comfortable, but you're not really acquiring anything new. You don't grow.
So what does this I+1 actually look like in practice for someone learning? Give us some examples.
Okay. Well, for a beginner, I+1 probably doesn't look like reading an authentic newspaper article on politics. That's likely I+100.
Right. Too much.
It might be something like a graded reader, or a children's storybook designed for 5-year-olds in that language. The simple sentences, the repetition, the pictures. They all provide context that helps you bridge that small gap, the +1, and understand the meaning even if you don't know every single word.
And for someone more intermediate?
For an intermediate learner, I+1 could be watching a specific type of TV show, maybe a reality show or a sitcom where the situations are familiar. Or listening to a podcast, like this one perhaps, on a topic you already know a lot about in your native language.
So the background knowledge helps bridge the gap.
Exactly. Even if you miss some specific vocabulary, the overall context, the topic knowledge, helps you get the gist, the meaning. And that ability to derive meaning from slightly challenging input is what fuels that pattern crunching tool in your brain.
That language machine you mentioned earlier.
Yes. And the good news is, that machine doesn't just shut off when you turn 12. It keeps working throughout adulthood. It constantly takes in the comprehensible input, chews up the sentences, and automatically, subconsciously spits out an internal grammar system for that language.
Just like it did when we were kids learning our first language.
Precisely. And you see this in action constantly with parents or caretakers talking to young children. They don't sit down and deliberately teach grammar rules, do they?
No, not usually. They just talk.
Yeah. They just talk, but they naturally modify their speech to help the child understand. It's a process linguists call rough tuning. They use simpler sentences, maybe a higher pitch, lots of repetition, pointing at things, all focused on getting the meaning across, not on explaining the past participle.
So focusing on communication, stories, music, interesting conversations. That kind of meaning-focused input is way more effective than just drilling grammar rules or memorizing word lists.
Vastly more effective for building that underlying acquired competence, yes.
But is input enough? You could have the perfect I+1 input, but if something's blocking it.
Yes. That brings us to the final piece of Krashen's core model, the effective filter.
Effective filter, okay with that.
The effective filter is Krashen's fifth hypothesis. Think of it like a mental block, or maybe a giant metal gate inside your head. When this filter is up, even perfect, comprehensible input can't get through to the part of your brain responsible for acquisition. It just bounces off.
That sounds exactly like what happens when you feel really anxious, maybe forced to speak in front of a class, or when someone is constantly correcting every little mistake you make.
That's precisely it. High anxiety, low motivation, feeling defensive or self-conscious, worrying about making mistakes. All those negative emotions raise the effective filter.
So that language learning guilt we started with, that literally stops you from learning.
It can severely impede acquisition, yes. If that filter is high, the input, no matter how comprehensible, simply won't reach the language acquisition device effectively. Your brain is too busy defending itself to be open to learning.
Wow. So for the learner, the goal of any good method, any good teacher, any good environment isn't just about providing that comprehensible input.
No, it's equally about creating a situation that encourages a low filter. A relaxed, comfortable, low-stress environment where the learner feels safe to take risks and make mistakes without judgment.
That reminds me, weren't there some methods like Suggestopedia? Didn't they try to do something like that?
Yes, Suggestopedia was quite popular for a while, developed by Georgy Lozanov. It explicitly tried to lower the effective filter. They used techniques like having students lie back in comfortable reclining chairs, dimming the lights, playing specific types of classical music like Baroque in the background.
Just relax.
It was meant to be. And the teacher would use deliberate, positive suggestions, kind of like hypnosis light, to enhance receptivity and reduce defensiveness. The whole goal was to create this relaxed, almost childlike state of openness.
Did it work? Did people learn languages super fast?
Well, the really dramatic claims of, learning hundreds of words a day were debated and maybe exaggerated, but the underlying principle is absolutely sound. If you can reduce anxiety, eliminate the guilt, remove the fear of making mistakes, you radically improve the potential for language acquisition to happen naturally, lower the filter, let the input flow.
Okay, this is fascinating. But here's where we hit another major source of that deep-seated guilt, right?
Yeah.
It's the feeling that as adults, we're just inherently worse learners than kids. We missed the boat. The critical period closed.
The critical period hypothesis. Yes, that looms large in the popular imagination.
We constantly compare ourselves, usually unfavorably, to that, 5-year-old immigrant kid who seems to just soak up the new language effortlessly on the playground while we're struggling with verb charts.
It's a common comparison, but the science is actually much more nuanced, especially when you try to properly measure what's called ultimate attainment, how close to native-like someone can eventually become.
What are the challenges in studying that?
Well, the early studies often had real problems separating 3 different tangled variables. First, the age someone started learning, age of first exposure. Second, the age they were when they were actually tested. And third, the total number of years they'd been exposed to the language.
Right. If you test 2 people, and both have lived in, say, France for 10 years, but one arrived at age 5 and the other arrived at age 30, the results are probably going to look very different.
Almost guaranteed to favor the early arrival, exactly. But is that purely because of age, or also because the 5-year-old just had more overall exposure during crucial developmental years? It's hard to untangle.
So how did researchers finally get a clearer picture? How did they isolate the effect of starting age itself?
They realized they needed way more data, like orders of magnitude more than you can get in a typical lab study with maybe 30 or 40 people. So a landmark study took inspiration from something unexpected. The New York Times dialect quiz. Remember that quiz that went viral a few years ago? It tried to guess where you grew up based on how you pronounce
Oh,
things.
yeah, that was fun. And surprisingly accurate sometimes.
Well, researchers adapted that idea. They created a massive online grammar quiz designed to go viral. It asked questions about subtle points of English grammar, vocabulary, accent perception, and they collected data from hundreds of thousands of people.
Hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes. English learners, native speakers, all sorts of ages and backgrounds. And that sheer volume of data finally gave them the statistical power they needed to start untangling those messy variables like age of arrival, years of exposure, and age at testing.
Okay, so what did this massive study find about the critical period? Did it slam shut at puberty?
Not exactly like a door slamming shut, no. What the data suggested was more of a slow, gradual decline in the ability to achieve native-like ultimate attainment. This decline seems to begin, on average, around age 17 or 18.
Ah, so later than many people think. Not like age 12 or something.
Right. And crucially, it's a gradual, pretty much linear decline. It's not a cliff you fall off. It doesn't mean adults can't learn languages or even reach extremely high levels of proficiency. It just means achieving that perfect, indistinguishable from a native level becomes statistically less likely the later you start.
Okay, that's already less guilt-inducing. But wasn't there another twist? Something about how adults perform initially.
Yes. And this is a huge point that should really help kill some of that guilt. When you look at the initial stages of learning, say, the first few months, maybe up to a year, especially in a formal learning setting,
Yep.
adults actually consistently perform better than young children. Not worse, better.
Really, adults learn faster at the beginning. Why?
It likely comes down to our more developed cognitive abilities. As adults, we can use conscious learning strategies. We understand abstract concepts like grammar rules, even if we can't use them fluently yet. We're literate in our first language, which helps immensely. And we can consciously transfer knowledge and strategies from our native language.
So kids aren't faster learners initially.
Not in terms of rate of learning explicit things, no. The child's long-term advantage seems to be more about their brain's neurological flexibility for effortless acquisition over many, many years, leading to that potentially higher ultimate attainment. But the adult learning process isn't about trying to magically become a child again. It's about leveraging our unique, sophisticated adult strengths and strategies.
Okay, that's empowering. Now, speaking of leveraging advantages, let's tackle another guilt trigger. The idea that some languages are just inherently harder than others. People feel bad if they struggle with, say, Polish cases compared to maybe Spanish verbs.
Right. That notion that language X is objectively hard, it was mostly a myth, or at least it's poorly stated. Languages aren't inherently hard in some absolute sense. They're only difficult relative to the learner's starting point, their native language.
So difficulty is relative.
Completely. If your native language is English, which has a relatively simple subject-verb-object structure and very few grammatical cases left, then yes, learning a language like German or Russian, which have multiple cases that change word endings and allow for more flexible word order, is going to feel hard because it's structurally very different.
Can you give a counterexample? Maybe a language often seen as hard by English speakers that's actually simpler in some ways.
Sure. Think about, say, Mandarin Chinese. The writing system is definitely challenging for alphabet users, but the actual grammar, in many ways, it's remarkably simple compared to European languages. You don't have verb conjugations for tense or person. You don't have complex noun declensions. Word order does a lot of the heavy lifting.
Interesting. Or what about Finnish? I hear that's got loads of cases.
It does, about 15 grammatical cases, which sounds terrifying. But look at how it handles negation, saying no or not. In Finnish, it's usually the negative word itself that changes form, while the main verb often stays the same. Compare that to English, where we have to stick in do not or does not and change the main verb back to its base form. It's actually quite complex. Finnish is structurally very different, yes, but not inherently harder across the board.
So the perceived difficulty is really just about the linguistic distance between your native language and the target language.
Exactly. And this is where adults can actually leverage another superpower, understanding language families. Katilam, that polyglot we mentioned, she talked about this. She observed that if you learn, say, Spanish first, it gives you a huge head start, significant cognitive and linguistic credit when you then move on to Italian or Portuguese or even French.
Because they share so much vocabulary and grammar.
Right. They're all Romance languages, descended from Latin. They share roots, structures. It provides a kind of scaffolding for learning the next one. Same with Slavic languages. Someone learning Serbian or Croatian finds Bulgarian much easier because there's maybe 70% overlap. Adults can consciously use this knowledge of language relationships.
And we absolutely know that reaching a really high level as an adult is possible, right? Because Lom herself is proof. Didn't she start English quite late?
She started English in her 30s and eventually worked professionally as an interpreter in something like 16 languages. Many she learned well into adulthood.
That's incredible.
Her experience, and countless others like hers, clearly demonstrates that the adult brain is fully capable of high-level second language acquisition. We might learn differently than children, but our advantages are formidable.
What are those advantages? Again, just to recap.
We usually have a clearer sense of our long-term goals. We have practiced learning skills from school or work. We often have established study habits. And perhaps most importantly, we have the mature ability to reflect on our own learning process, figure out what works for us, and take conscious control.
So maybe you won't achieve that absolutely perfect native-like accent if you start late.
Perhaps not, but you are infinitely better equipped than a child to strategically manage the complex journey of learning a language effectively as an adult. Stop comparing yourself to 5-year-olds and start using your adult superpowers.
Okay, fantastic. We've hopefully dismantled the guilt about being, slow learner or an old learner, but we still face that constant nagging short-term frustration. Forgetting stuff.
Oh, yeah, yes. The leaky brain problem.
Exactly. If I learn, say, 30 new words today using flashcards, how do I stop 25 of them from just vanishing by tomorrow morning? That leads right back into that negative self-critical spiral.
It absolutely does. So we need systems. Systems that work with how our brain's memory actually functions, rather than fighting against the inherent leakiness of human memory.
And what's the biggest weapon we have in that fight?
Probably the greatest ally here is a combination of cognitive science and technology. Spaced repetition systems, or SRS.
SRS, right. You mentioned things like Anki.
Yes, Anki is a very popular one, but there are others. The core principle is brilliantly simple but incredibly powerful. Forgetting is the enemy, right? The plan to defeat it lies almost entirely in timing, specifically the timing of when you try to recall information.
So this is the scientific opposite of cramming for a test the night before.
Precisely. Cramming might stuff information into your short-term memory for a day or two, but it doesn't build lasting connections. Retrieval practice, actively trying to remember something spaced out at increasing intervals, that's what signals to your brain, hey, this information is important, keep it accessible. It builds stronger, long-term neural pathways.
And is it really that efficient?
It is extraordinarily efficient compared to just reviewing things randomly or cramming. One of our sources crunched some numbers based on typical SRS use. If you practice consistently for about 30 minutes a day over a 4-month period, you could reasonably expect to learn and retain something like 3,600 flashcards.
3,600, wow. With what kind of accuracy?
With really high accuracy, typically in the 90 to 95% range.
That's amazing retention. How does the spacing actually work? What does that ideal timing look like for someone using an app like Anki?
The algorithms vary slightly, but the core idea is based on the forgetting curve. You want to review the information just as you're about to forget it. So the sequence might look something like this. You learn a new word or fact. You see it again maybe a few minutes later, then perhaps an hour later, then the next day. If you get it right, the next interval gets longer, maybe 3 or 4 days, then a week, then a couple of weeks, then a month, and so on.
So each successful recall pushes the next review further out.
Exactly. You're forcing your brain to work just hard enough to retrieve the memory before it fades completely. This desirable difficulty, this effortful retrieval, is what makes the learning stick so much better and last exponentially longer than just looking at the same list 10 times in one sitting, which feels like you're working hard, but the learning is shallow and quickly lost.
Okay, so SRS handles the timing of recall. But what about making the initial memory stronger in the first place? Retrieval is only useful if there's something there to retrieve, right?
Absolutely critical point. We need to make the initial learning experience, the encoding of the memory, as rich and deep as possible. And this brings us to another key concept from cognitive psychology, levels of processing.
Levels of processing, meaning.
Meaning that memories are stronger and last longer when we process the information more deeply. Shallow processing, like just noticing the font a word is written in, leads to weak memories. Deep processing, thinking about the meaning of the word, how it relates to other things you know, how it makes you feel, leads to much stronger, more durable memories.
And how can we deliberately create deeper processing when learning, say, vocabulary?
One of the most powerful ways is to leverage our incredible, often untapped capacity for visual memory. Our brains are wired for images. Consider this study. Researchers showed college students 10,000 unique random images just for a few seconds each over 5 days. Later, the students could accurately identify having seen 83% of those images.
83% of 10,000 random images. That's staggering.
It really is. Our visual memory bandwidth is enormous. So the practical takeaway, stop making flashcards that just have the foreign word on one side and the English translation on the other. That's shallow verbal-to-verbal processing.
So use pictures instead.
Absolutely. Use pictures, use diagrams, find relevant images online. Even if you're terrible at drawing, sketch a quick stick figure or a simple icon representing the word's meaning. Adding that visual element dramatically deepens the initial encoding. It bypasses the often overloaded verbal circuits and taps into that massive visual memory system.
Okay, visual memory helps. Is there an even deeper level of processing we can aim for?
Yes. The deepest, most powerful level is personal connection. Information, a word, a phrase, a concept that you can connect to your own life, your own experiences, feelings, or memories is remembered far more easily. Some estimates suggest maybe 50% more easily than abstract, disconnected facts.
So how would that work with a new word?
Let's say you're learning the word for bridge in Spanish, puente. Instead of just pairing puente with bridge, think of a specific bridge you know. Maybe the Golden Gate Bridge or that little wooden bridge you cross on your favorite hike. Find a picture of that specific bridge and put it on your flashcard with the word puente. Now visualize yourself on that bridge, maybe feeling the wind, hearing the sounds, and think the word puente.
So you're linking the new word not just to an abstract concept, but to a rich, multi-sensory personal memory.
Exactly. You're building a whole network of connections in your brain, visual, emotional, experiential, all linked to that new word. When you do that, the word stops being just an arbitrary string of sounds and starts becoming part of your own mental landscape. It becomes, as one source puts it, practically unforgettable. That's how you really defeat that short-term forgetting cycle, make the initial learning deep, visual, and personal.
Okay, so we have strategies for remembering words and concepts. But what about actually producing the language, specifically pronunciation? This often feels like you're fighting your own mouth, your own ears, especially when you literally can't hear the difference between two sounds in the new language.
It often is a biological fight, in a way. Adult brains are incredibly efficient, which is usually good, but it means they've become highly attuned to the specific set of sounds, the phonemes, of our native language. And they tend to filter out or miscategorize sounds that don't fit that familiar pattern.
Can you give an example?
The classic example is the difficulty many native Japanese speakers have distinguishing between the English R sound in rock and the L sound in lock. That specific distinction doesn't exist as separate phonemes in Japanese, so their brains, through long experience, have essentially learned to treat them as variations of the same sound. They might literally not perceive the difference that's obvious to a native English speaker.
Wow. So they're not just being careless, they genuinely can't hear it initially.
Often, yes, their auditory system isn't tuned to pick up that specific acoustic difference as meaningful.
So, how on earth can someone rewire their brain to hear sounds that it's learned to ignore? That seems impossible.
It's not impossible, but it requires focused training with the right kind of feedback. One very effective technique is called minimal pair testing. Minimal pairs are words that differ by only one sound, like rock and lock or ship and sheep.
Okay.
Researchers found that by having learners listen to these minimal pairs and identify which word they heard, and crucially providing immediate clear feedback, like a green check mark if they were right, a red X if they were wrong, learners could actually retrain their auditory perception.
Just by getting that instant feedback, how quickly?
Remarkably quickly in some studies. For the R and L distinction with Japanese learners, significant improvement was seen after just 3 20-minute training sessions spread over a few weeks. The consistent, immediate feedback essentially forces the brain to pay attention to the subtle acoustic cues it was previously filtering out. It learns to make the distinction.
That's incredible. So you can actually consciously train your brain to hear things it couldn't before, just through focused practice and feedback.
Yes. It's bringing a subconscious perceptual process under more conscious control, at least initially, to establish the new category.
Okay, what about the other side of pronunciation actually making the sounds?
Hmm.
Especially those incredibly long, intimidating words you find in languages like German. They look impossible to wrap your mouth around.
Ah, yes, those wonderful German compound nouns, like the famous one for speed limit, Höchstgeschwindigkeitsbegrenzung.
Yeah, exactly. How do you even begin to tackle something like that?
Trying to say it from beginning to end when you first see it is usually a recipe for disaster. Your brain just gets overloaded. There's a fantastic technique called backchaining.
Backchaining, how does that work?
Instead of starting at the beginning of the word, you start at the very end and gradually add syllables or chunks working backwards.
Okay, let's try it with that speed limit word. Höchstgeschwindigkeitsbegrenzung. Where do we start?
We start right at the end. Just say sum.
Zoom. Okay, now add the bit before it. Grenzung.
Grenzo.
Good, now the bit before that.
Grenzo.
Grenzung.
Keep going.
Begrenzung.
Begrenzung.
Keitsbegrenzung.
Getting longer.
It is. Dichtheitsbegrenzung.
Geschwindigkeitsbegrenzung.
Windigkeitsbegrenzung.
Geschwindigkeitsbegrenzung.
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 Almost there. And finally, Höchstgeschwindigkeitsbegrenzung.
Höchstgeschwindigkeitsbegrenzung. Hä? I said it. That actually works.
It does. By breaking it down from the end, you master the rhythm and sound connections of each segment before adding the next. It turns what looks like an insurmountable phonetic wall into a series of manageable steps. You conquer the complexity from back to front.
That's a brilliant practical tip. Okay, last piece in this section. Let's bring it back to grammar. We established earlier that just drilling grammar rules consciously is often boring and, more importantly, not very effective for building that subconscious fluent acquisition. Right. It mainly builds conscious learning, the monitor, which isn't great for real-time use.
So how should we use grammar materials like textbooks or websites in a way that actually helps acquisition and doesn't just feel like painful homework? A guilt-free way.
The key is to shift your mindset. Don't treat the grammar book like a workbook full of exercises to complete perfectly. Instead, think of it as a kind of quick guided tour of the language's structure.
A guided tour. Okay, so what do you do on this tour?
You read the explanation for a particular grammar point, let's say how plurals work in Italian, or how to use the partitive article, some in French. Understand the basic concept. But then, instead of doing 20 fill-in-the-blank drills, you actively look for just 2 or 3 really good, clear, memorable example sentences that illustrate that rule in action.
Ah, so you're hunting for comprehensible input about the grammar rule.
Exactly. You're converting abstract rules into concrete, meaningful language samples. For example, in Italian, you might notice the pattern with plurals ending in O becoming U, like gelato becoming gelati, and plurals ending in O becoming E, like pizza becoming pizzi.
Right.
You find a couple of good example sentences showing this, like mi piacciono I gelati, I like ice creams, or ordiniamo 2 pizze, let's order 2 pizzas. Now, instead of drilling the rule, you take those complete sentences.
And make flashcards out of them. With pictures, maybe?
Precisely. Make a flashcard with the sentence ordiniamo 2 pizze on one side, and maybe a picture of 2 pizzas and the English translation on the other. Or even better, connect it to a personal memory of ordering pizza. Now, when you review that card using your SRS, you're not just memorizing a rule, you're taking in a chunk of meaningful, comprehensible input that contains the grammatical pattern.
So your subconscious acquisition machine gets to work on the sentence and figures out the rule naturally over time just by seeing it used correctly in context.
That's the idea. You're feeding the pattern to your acquisition system in a digestible format, rather than trying to force it into your conscious brain through painful drilling. You make the grammar work for the acquisition process, not against it. It becomes part of the input, not a separate, dreaded subject.
Okay, this is all incredibly helpful. We have tools for memory, pronunciation, even making grammar useful. We understand acquisition versus learning, the effective filter.
Yeah.
Let's be real. Even with all this, we still hit those plateaus, don't we?
Oh, absolutely. Progress is rarely linear.
We still feel that inconsistency, or sometimes, even worse, we feel like we've actually regressed. That horrible feeling that maybe you forgot more this week than you learned last week. This feels like the ultimate test for getting rid of that guilt.
It is. And to pass that test, we have to accept a fundamental truth about language acquisition. It's not a neat, straight line going upwards. It's often messy. It can feel nonlinear, even leaping back on itself sometimes. And crucially, it proceeds according to its own internal timetable.
Internal timetable, what do you mean?
This relates to another of Krashen's hypotheses, actually, the natural order hypothesis. Research strongly suggests that the acquisition of grammatical structures happens in a predictable sequence, a natural order that's surprisingly consistent across learners, regardless of their native language or the order in which rules are taught in class.
Wait a minute. Are you saying that no matter how hard I drill, say, the really complex conditional mood in Spanish, if my brain's internal acquisition system hasn't reached that developmental stage yet for conditionals, I'm basically wasting my time, at least for developing fluency?
For developing automatic, fluent use of that structure through acquisition, largely yes. Your conscious learning might improve. You might be able to score better on a written test about conditionals, but your brain's subconscious acquisition system has its own developmental path.
And you can't force it to skip stages.
The evidence suggests you really can't. No amount of explicit instruction or conscious drilling on Rule Z seems to allow a learner to skip developmental stages X and Y if their acquisition system isn't ready for Z yet.
Can you give a concrete example of this natural order in action? What does it look like?
A well-studied example is the acquisition of negation in English by learners from various backgrounds. They tend to pass through predictable stages. Stage 1 might be just putting no before the verb, like no like. Stage 2 often involves using don't, but maybe incorrectly, like he don't like. Stage 3 might involve correct use of don't and doesn't. And stage 4 involves handling auxiliaries correctly in more complex sentences.
So if a student says something like, it's no my book, even if their textbook covered is not or isn't weeks ago.
That it's no my book might actually be a perfectly normal stage 2 transitional form. It doesn't necessarily mean they weren't paying attention or failed to learn the rule consciously. It often means their acquisition system is currently working through stage 2 negation patterns. The error, from an acquisition perspective, is actually evidence of progress along the natural order path.
That's a massive reframing. An error isn't always a failure. It can be a signpost showing where your subconscious brain currently is on its developmental journey.
Exactly. It's a marker of development, not necessarily a sign of personal inadequacy or lack of effort.
Okay, so if that acquisition process is unfolding naturally, maybe stubbornly, in the background, how should we structure our conscious effort as adults to best support it without trying to force it or feeling guilty about the errors?
The key seems to be balanced effort across different types of activities. You can't just do one thing. Language acquisition experts often talk about the importance of dedicating roughly equal time and effort to what they call the 4 strands of language practice.
The 4 strands. Okay, let's break those down. What's strand 1?
Strand 1. Learning from meaning-focused input. This is your classic comprehensible input listening and reading. The key here is that your primary focus is on understanding the message, the meaning. Reading books you enjoy, watching movies, listening to podcasts, or conversations where you're focused on what's being said, not how it's being said grammatically.
Okay, pure CI.
Yep.
Got it. Strand 2.
Strand 2. Learning from meaning-focused output. This is the flip side. Using the language to convey your own meaning speaking and writing. Again, the focus is on communication for real purposes. Talking to a language partner, writing emails, participating in discussions, keeping a journal in the target language. The goal is to get your message across.
Makes sense. Input and output focused on meaning. Strand 3.
Strand 3. Language-focused learning. This is where the conscious study comes in, but done strategically and hopefully guilt-free using the systems we talked about. This includes things like studying vocabulary with your SRS, working on pronunciation using minimal pairs or backchaining, or taking that quick guided tour through a grammar point to find memorable examples. It's deliberate attention to language forms.
Okay, that's the conscious learning part. What's the 4th strand? This one feels like it might be missed sometime.
Strand 4. Fluency development. This is crucial and often neglected. Fluency development involves taking language material that is already easy for you, stuff you know really well, and practicing using it smoothly, quickly, and effortlessly.
Using easy material. Why?
Because the goal here isn't to learn new things, it's to make what you already know faster and more automatic. Activities could include things like speed reading, simple texts you've read before, retelling a story you know well but trying to do it more quickly each time, doing timed writing exercises on familiar topics, or having conversations where you deliberately try to speak more smoothly, using only vocabulary and structures you're comfortable with. It's about automating the retrieval process.
So it's like moving knowledge from that slow, effortful monitor system into the fast, automatic subconscious acquisition system.
That's a good way to think about it, yes. It's building processing speed and automaticity with the language components you've already started to acquire or learn. So real consistency in language learning isn't just about drilling grammar every day. It's about balancing your time and effort across these four strands: meaning-focused input, meaning-focused output, language-focused learning, and fluency development. If you neglect one, your overall progress might stall.
That's a really practical framework.
hmm
Okay, now for the long-term reality check. What about when you stop studying for a while? Maybe life gets busy, you take a break for months, even years. That guilt, when you come back and feel like everything has just vanished, is it really gone?
Well, we have to be realistic. Language knowledge, especially knowledge that has been deeply acquired or frequently used, does rust if left unused. It's not like riding a bike. Some aspects definitely fade.
Okay.
Interestingly, the trajectory of long-term language knowledge isn't always straightforward decay. One source, drawing on Khalil Lam's experiences, mentioned that the pattern can sometimes look more like a parabola over a lifetime,
A parabola. How so?
meaning that sometimes, as people get older, language skills or memories from much earlier in life, maybe a language learned partially in childhood, can actually become more prominent or easier to reactivate, potentially even at the expense of languages learned more recently, say, in their 20s or 30s, if those later languages haven't been maintained.
Wow. So the skills you thought were long lost might actually be closer to the surface than the ones you learned last year, simply because of when and how deeply they were encoded originally.
It's possible. Memory is a complex thing, but the main point is that forgetting, or the feeling of skills receding, is normal, especially with disuse. The key is not to let the guilt about that stop you from reactivating them. Often, it comes back faster than you think.
And that links back to output, right? You mentioned meaning-focused output as strand 2. How critical is that for maintenance and fluency?
It's absolutely vital, especially for turning passive knowledge into active skill. While acquisition comes primarily from input, output, actually speaking and writing, does several crucial things. First, it forces you to retrieve language, strengthening those neural pathways. Second, it inevitably reveals the gaps in your knowledge. Trying to say something and realizing you don't know the word or structure is powerful feedback. Third, it forces you to experiment with grammar and sentence construction, essentially testing the hypotheses your acquisition system has been building.
So output kind of pressure tests your internal grammar.
In a way, yes. It forces you to move from just understanding to actually producing. That's why intensive immersion experiences where you're forced to speak constantly are so effective. Or even just imposing a personal challenge, like, okay, for the next hour, I'm only allowed to think and speak in Spanish. That kind of forced output accelerates the conversion of passive acquired knowledge into active, usable fluency.
So let's bring it all together for the final word on guilt. That feeling of confusion, the frustration, maybe feeling like you've taken 2 steps back after hitting a difficult grammar point, that's not a sign you're failing.
Absolutely not. According to the perspective we've discussed today, it's actually evidence that you are grappling with the language, engaging with it. It's a sign you're returning to what one source beautifully called those stubborn fortresses of grammatical resistance.
Stubborn fortresses, I like that.
These are the complex bits, the patterns your acquisition system hasn't fully integrated yet. You'll likely circle back to them multiple times, but each time you engage, you chip away at the walls. And eventually, hopefully, you return, and it stops feeling like a fortress. It stops feeling like work. It just starts feeling,
Yeah.
right?
So embrace the mess.
Embrace the mess. It means the acquisition process is happening, even if it doesn't feel neat and tidy. View the whole endeavor, as another source suggested, as perpetually unfinished business. Let go of the need for perfection today and focus on consistent, balanced engagement over the long haul. ####Zix. Conclusion and final thought.
Wow. Okay, this has been a really liberating deep dive. I feel like we've systematically taken apart the foundations of language learning guilt using both science and practical experience. Let's try to recap the biggest takeaways for everyone listening.
Yeah, let's boil it down. First, and maybe most importantly, ditch the guilt and stop comparing yourself unfavorably to children. You're an adult learner. That comes with some challenges, yes, but also specific, powerful advantages like literacy, strategic thinking, and practice learning skills. Learn to leverage your strengths.
Right. You're not a faulty child learner. You're a competent adult learner. Second takeaway.
Focus on feeding the real engine of fluency, subconscious acquisition. Remember, this is primarily fueled by lots and lots of comprehensible input, that I+1 sweet spot. And just as crucial, actively work to keep your effective filter low. Create or find learning situations that are relaxed, interesting, and meaning-focused, not anxiety-inducing or overly focused on error correction, meaning first.
Okay, feed the subconscious with low-stress input. Got it. And third,
Defeat the short-term frustration of forgetting by using efficient, brain-friendly systems. We talked about spaced repetition systems, SRS, for timing your recall optimally. And we talked about making initial learning deeper through mnemonic imagery, using pictures, and finding personal connections to make new information stick. And remember, overall mastery comes from balanced practice across the four strands: input, output, focus, study, and fluency building. Don't just do one thing.
fantastic summary. Leverage adult strengths. Focus on comprehensible input with a low filter. Use smart tools for memory and balance your practice.
Yeah.
But, the benefits we've discussed, they go way beyond just being able to order a coffee on vacation, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. The knowledge gained here isn't just about language. The very act of wrestling with a new language, engaging with these processes, it's quite literally, as one source put it, strength training for your brain.
Strength training for the brain. How so?
Well, the neuroscience is increasingly clear on this. Learning and using another language genuinely changes your brain structure. You don't just seem smarter or more capable, your brain physically adapts and becomes different.
Different how?
Studies using brain imaging show that bilingual and multilingual brains often have measurably greater density of gray matter, particularly in areas related to executive control, like the prefrontal cortex. This is the part of the brain involved in planning, problem solving, focusing attention, and filtering distractions.
So learning a language actually builds up the parts of your brain responsible for higher level thinking.
It appears so, and the structural difference seems to have real-world consequences. For example, numerous studies have shown that elderly bilinguals, on average, develop symptoms of dementia, like Alzheimer's disease, about 4 to 5 years later than their monolingual peers who have the same underlying level of pathology.
4 to 5 years later. That's significant. It's like building cognitive reserve.
Exactly. That constant mental juggling between languages seems to build resilience in the brain. So it's not just a hobby, it's an investment in your long-term cognitive health.
Okay, that's powerful. So that leads us to our final thought for you, the listener, to maybe chew on after this deep dive, building on everything we've covered.
Right. Think about this. If you look at the global linguistic landscape today, what's arguably the most widespread, most commonly used language in the world for international communication, business, science, travel.
I mean, it's got to be English, right?
Yes, but maybe not English in its perfect native form. One source provocatively suggests that the most widespread language is actually broken English. Think about it. Hundreds of millions, maybe billions of people around the world use English as a lingua franca, a tool for communication, often with non-native accents, sometimes with grammatical errors, but they are successfully interacting, doing business, sharing ideas, connecting.
They're prioritizing getting the meaning across over achieving grammatical perfection.
Precisely. So if the real goal for most of us is communication, connection, experiencing new cultures, and gaining those incredible cognitive benefits we just talked about, why do we let the pursuit of unattainable perfection and the resulting guilt hold us back?
Why worry so much about making mistakes if the primary goal is understanding and being understood?
Exactly. The ultimate goal for most learners isn't native-like perfection, it's functional fluency. And fluency only truly happens when you overcome that fear, lower that affective filter, embrace the messiness of acquisition, and simply refuse to let the worry about mistakes keep you silent.
So the final message is, go out there, open your mouth, make some beautiful, slightly messy, wonderfully imperfect language acquiring mistakes. That's how you truly learn.